Sure.
So welcome everybody to week 5 of the Cecil Gibb research seminar series. Today we're very lucky to have a guest speaker from Canada who's been very kind to us and stayed up very late to give this presentation. So first I'll hand over to Michaela, who will give us sort of the housekeeping rules, and then Kate will introduce our speaker.
Hi everyone, thanks for joining the Psychology Seminar Series. Just a few housekeeping rules. Just a reminder that this seminar is being recorded and will be available on the Psychology YouTube playlist. Upon entry of the webinar, you've all been muted, and we ask that you please stay muted for the duration of the seminar. We'll have question time at the end of the seminar. If you have any questions, you can write them down in the Q&A box below at any time. Alternatively, if you raise your hand, I will unmute you and you can ask your question. Thanks, and I'll hand off to Kate.
Excellent, thank you. Well, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands on which we meet today, wherever we are, as part of this ANU Psychology Seminar. And we'd also like to pay our respects to elders past and present, and welcome and extend this respect to Indigenous and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today. I'm very happy to introduce Professor Michael Wohl from Carleton University in Canada. Michael's is really talking to us here from the past because it's 9 o'clock on a Tuesday night for him. So thank you for joining us on your Tuesday evening, Michael. I guess once we realised that this seminar series was going to be online for at least the first half of this year, it really motivated us to think about, well, who would we like to connect with, given we can connect with people all over the world during our seminar series, people who we would often interact with and meet with during normal conference travel and the like. And as part of that, of course, Nima reached out to you, Michael. So thank you for joining us. So Michael received his PhD from the University of Alberta, and he's a recipient of a number of teaching awards and research awards across his career. He's also closely connected to ANU through Nima. He helped supervise Nima's PhD and of course has a number of joint publications with Nima. So thank you very much, Michael. He's also, of course, been here, visited here, and there's lots of points of connection between the social psychology group here at ANU and Michael and the work that he does. He's an expert on intergroup relations and conducting work on the impact of conflict, harm doing, and also what to do about it, for example, through forgiveness and reconciliation. There's an emphasis on intergroup emotions and concerns about the fate of one's group, both in the past and in the future. And today we're going to hear a little bit about that work through collective nostalgia. So I'll hand over to you, Michael.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. And I should say that I'm giving the talk today on the unceded territory of the Algonquin peoples. And if you'll just give me a moment, I will share screen here. Now you hopefully see my slides. Is that the case?
Yep.
Okay, and I will say I have a 2-screen setup here, so thank you, Kate. I can see at least one face, but when we go to the question and answer period, I'll be looking over to the side because that's where all of you happen to be on my computer. But without further ado, I'm incredibly happy to be here today to take you on a journey through my research, both past and present, which is also a nice segue into my talk about time. I'm going to start this talk a little bit differently than normal. I'm going to start it with a song. Now, don't worry, I'm not going to sing. I'm also going to weigh into an area that I really have no place being, and that is Australian history. But as some in this virtual room can attest, I have a rather unhealthy love for Australia. In fact, I was just saying that my wallpaper on my computer now, as has been the case for the last 12 years, is a picture of the Gold Coast. So water crashing on the rocks. But Nonetheless, let's weigh into some Australian history. Waltzing Matilda, I probably don't have to sing this song. I'm sure that everybody in this virtual room knows this song. I'm not sure whether all of you know the history of the song though. The song references the sheep herders strike. I believe it was in 1894. Basically, the sheep shearers were rebelling against the British class system. Now, such songs are not uncommon, right? They are nation building through story, or in this case, story put to music. After all, what is a group without its stories? The telling and retelling of group tragedies and its triumphs, they are the building blocks of every social group. I'm assuming that most people in this virtual room know of or have played the game Jenga. Think of each story as a log in the Jenga tower, okay? The tower doesn't exist without the logs, like a group does not exist without its stories. Now, why are stories so important? They're important because they inform members of who they are, where they came from, and where they are going. Unfortunately, modernity has fueled a sense of loss and change that has created disconnection with the past. To put in social psychological terms, and social psychologists like creating complex terms for very simple constructs, but to put in psychological terms, groups are feeling a sense of collective discontinuity with their past, with their group's essence, losing what it means to be Australian, for example, or as I'll show you today, losing what it means to be a French Canadian or Polish or an American. But if you'll permit me, let's go back to the idea of a Jenga tower. Akin to playing the game, many groups perceive collective discontinuity in a manner similar to the blocks from a Jenga tower slowly being removed. After all, what happens when too many blocks are removed? The tower falls over. Okay, group members are motivated to ensure that their group does not fall into non-existence. I'm going to make this a little bit more concrete for you. In the French Canadian province of Quebec, it's a province, one of the provinces in Canada that is predominantly Francophone, surrounded by Anglophones. Now, the French Canadians, known as Québécois, are notoriously concerned about their identity, the future vitality of their identity. And some communities have taken extreme action in order to protect their group's future. Specifically, this town of Aéroville, it's a small French Canadian town in rural Quebec. And a number of years back now, it's probably going back about 10 years, they passed what's called the Declaration of Norms. When it was passed on the town's website, they said, it said, "We wish to inform new immigrant arrivals that their way of life, which they have abandoned when they left their country of origin, cannot be recreated here. We consider it completely outside the norms to kill women by stoning them in public, burning them alive, burning them with acid, or circumcising them." This is the list of the code of conduct. Now, what's really interesting about this situation is that at the time that this declaration, this code of conduct was passed, there was not a single non-French Canadian living in Aéroville, and there wasn't a single non-French Canadian planning to move to Arrowville. Yet they were concerned, so concerned about their future and what might happen, should somebody, some non-French Canadian move. They felt that they had to pass this declaration. What I always tell my students is that in psychology, and specifically social psychology, we don't necessarily study reality. We study the perception of reality, okay? And for the past decade, I have been examining the group-based emotion that stems from these perceived existential threats, what I have labeled collective angst, or the concern for the group's future vitality, which can be quite removed from the group's current lived experience. So by any metric, Quebec is doing quite well when it comes to French Canadian culture and the extent to which the language is thriving. But group members can still feel that their future vitality is under threat. Importantly, the emotional goal of collective angst is to protect the in-group's future. Now, this can happen either constructively or pro-socially, or destructively, or anti-social forms. And over the years, myself and other researchers have shown many of these consequences of collective angst, all of which, remember, the emotional goal is to protect the group. Constructive ways, when group members feel collective angst, there's greater in-group cohesion, there's greater willingness to compromise with the adversary if they believe that compromise will secure the group's future. Environmentalism. On the destructive side, we see anti-immigration sentiments and increase in conspiracy thinking and support for violence. But one of the things that's really been nagging me over the last number of years is what we have not yet quite put our finger on is what leads group members to engage in those destructive or constructive actions. Why do some groups choose compromise? Some group members choose compromise when they experience collective angst, whereas others will support violence. And this is where my research has been focused of late. My colleagues and I have argued that collective angst, that is, again, the concern for the group's future, turns group members towards its past. Okay, so once again, this concern for the group's future will turn the group members towards their past. And let me explain this a little bit further. The human mind is a master time traveler. We can project ourselves into the future. And when the future is perceived to be under threat, group members find grounding and comfort in the treasured past of their in-group. And I think this is nicely illustrated by the slide that hopefully all of you are seeing. Preserving the past to protect the future. We protect the group's future by preserving the group's past, a perceived better past, when groups enjoyed better times. Put simply, group members nostalgize. Now, what is nostalgia? It's an emotion that reflects sentimental longing for the past. When members believe that current social, cultural, political realities have placed the stability of their group in flux, they often experience collective nostalgia. Importantly, nostalgizing is functional. It's a coping mechanism. Okay, it's a coping mechanism that allows group members to focus on what aspects of the group are important and thus what needs to be protected in the face of existential threat. Okay, put differently, the goal of collective nostalgia is to reestablish the past in the present to protect the group's future. Okay, I'll repeat that because it's important for later on. The goal of collective nostalgia is to reestablish the past in the present to protect the group's future. Now, how can collective nostalgia protect the group? Well, previous research has shown that this can be done in a few ways. Increasing positive regard for the in-group, exclusionistic tendencies, okay? So defending in-group boundaries and taking collective action. My colleagues and I have argued that an antecedent for this process is existential threat-induced collective angst, okay? So existential threat should elicit collective angst, which leads to nostalgizing, and it's that nostalgia that directs behavior, okay? Now, before I go forward, I want to underscore a point, okay? For those who are in Kate's lab, or others who are in this virtual room who study emotion or group-based emotion in particular, you might be asking yourself, so wait a second, so you're saying one emotion leads to another emotion? Yes, and this is actually a lost aspect or understudied aspect of intergroup emotions theory, that group members can experience a blending of emotions. Okay, so the study that always comes to mind is a great study by Eran Halperin. And he asked, when are group members going to act violently against another group? He said that he showed that it's not anger on its own, and it's not hate on its own that's going to lead to violence. It's when you have an emotional sentiment of hate, meaning you hate another group, and then that group does something that angers you. It's that combination of emotions, that interaction of the emotions that causes that kind of behavior. We also know from research on emotions at the interpersonal level that emotions can be experienced sequentially, simultaneously and sequentially. We predicted that angst should lead to nostalgia. And so I'm going to finally present some data for it. After about 15 minutes, finally we get to some data. Data I'm going to show you is data that I was, so Yolanda Yetten at UQ organized a group of researchers in 27 countries to collect a battery of data. And within that data, we had my measure of collective angst, collective nostalgia, as well as what one could frame as constructive and destructive responses. Okay, so in-group protective behaviors, in-group identification, and opposition to immigration. And so what we found, and I'll walk you through this, is that as we predicted, that collective angst led to collective nostalgizing. And it's the nostalgia that ended up leading to in-group, an increase in a sense of in-group belonging, which we have shown is a predictor, that is an outcome of collective angst, and opposition to immigration. That nostalgia seems to mediate that relation, okay? Now, there's still some messiness here. So although we were quite pleased, and this was published, that now, yes, we now have evidence that it's the nostalgia. So when you are worried about the future, you reflect on the past, and it's that reflecting on the past that seems to drive the behaviors. We still haven't figured out what leads a group member to support constructive outcomes or destructive outcomes. Here we see that it happens, that both are outcomes of nostalgizing. All we've done here, is said that there's an intervening emotion, okay? But we haven't figured out the answer for that fundamental question. Now, this led to a lot of discussion in my lab. And one of the things that I noticed that really bothers me about the collective nostalgia literature is that almost all of the time, when you look at the measure that's used, the measures are like, I feel nostalgic for my group's past, okay? But what are they nostalgic for? That's critical, understanding the content of the emotion that's being experienced. Now, it's important to note that that collective memories, which are the heart of nostalgizing, are social constructions, okay? Typically constructed to make us feel good about our group, its past, its present, and its future. So when I grew up, when I think about my social studies class growing up, we still learned that Euro-Canadians helped bring civilization to the Indigenous population of Canada, and that was celebrated. This was, of course, a social construction, one that thankfully has shifted with time. However, it's entirely possible that that narrative could see a resurgence. And why? Because our understanding about history is easily manipulated, especially when groups feel that they are under threat, when they feel collective angst, okay? So much of my current research is focused on understanding collective nostalgia and all of its manifestations. Specifically, my colleagues and I have argued that to understand the effect of angst-induced nostalgia, we need to come to terms with the idea that not all nostalgizing is the same, okay? After all, nostalgia is often the product of retrospective mythologizing about the Ingroup's past. So some nostalgizing, okay? Some nostalgizing, some will nostalgize about a time when the group was more open to cultural and ethnic diversity, if it ever really was, okay? And if you look at a lot of the rhetoric during Obama's lead up to his presidency, he used nostalgia quite a bit, okay, to talk about going back, that America had lost its way under Bush, right? And that he was going to bring back the essence of what it meant to be an American. And a lot of the rhetoric was around the fact that, you know, we're a nation of immigrants. That's who we are in our bones, okay? Others, of course, may nostalgize about a time when the group was more homogeneous, if it ever really was, okay? I don't think I need to explain this, but you know, Trump used nostalgia. It's baked into his slogan, "Make America Great Again," you know, which was a dog whistle to to when white men, you know, had all the power, right? Which by and large they still do, but I digress. What we hypothesized that the content of nostalgia matters, okay? And in the first study, we examined two possible contents that we thought would matter. What we called openness-focused nostalgia, that is nostalgia for when the group was more open to other cultures and traditions, and a homogeneity-focused nostalgia, okay? But there are also likely other kinds of nostalgia contents out there as well, and we're starting to dive into it, and I'll show you a little bit later. So in our first study, we created a scale, an openness-focused nostalgia scale, a homogeneity-focused scale, and measured anti-immigration sentiments and prejudice against Muslims, a scale that Nima helped us develop. So thanks, Nima. And what we found is that statistically, the homogeneity-focused nostalgia and openness-focused nostalgia were distinct from each other, okay? And they were uniquely predictive. So whereas openness-focused nostalgia predicted a decrease in anti-immigration sentiments and a decrease in prejudice, the collective nostalgia for a more homogeneous society was positively related to prejudice against Muslim Americans and anti-immigration sentiments. And we replicated this structure in a nationally representative sample of polls. Now, of course, what's, from an, it was important to us to see if we could then experimentally manipulate people to feel one kind of nostalgia or another. If you recall, what I was arguing is that leaders are very good at eliciting anxiety among the populace and nostalgizing about a particular aspect of the group's history in order to motivate a specific outcome. And so in a follow-up study, we manipulated, we attempted to manipulate the content of the nostalgia that group members were feeling. We had a control group, and then again, an openness-focused nostalgia manipulation and a homogeneity-focused nostalgia manipulation. And then measured anti-immigration sentiments again and anti-Muslim prejudice. And what we found, as predicted, and because it was published, obviously, we found what we predicted, is that the manipulation, so those who felt the openness focus, so in the openness condition, they experienced greater openness focused nostalgia and had the same downstream consequences on anti-Muslim sentiments and anti-immigration sentiments as we saw in the correlational study. So what we find here is that the content of nostalgia matters, okay? Number one, it's possible to distinguish between different types of nostalgizing that group members are feeling, and those different types of nostalgizing have unique outcomes. And additionally, we can manipulate people to experience one type of nostalgia versus another. Now, when we first started diving into this nostalgia literature, we noticed something interesting, okay? Nostalgia was framed as a conservative emotion. And why might that be? Well, on the surface, on its surface, this characterization makes some sense, because central to conservatism is a positive evaluation of the past, a valuing of the past status quo, and a corresponding desire to keep things how they were. And in fact, conservative philosophers believe that the past has intrinsic value and should be respected. And some have even characterized conservative political philosophy as the politics of nostalgia. What we wanted to know is that the case, or is it simply the content of the nostalgia that happened to be in focus in their research, okay? That it's more of a status quo kind of nostalgia. Again, if we look at the rhetoric of Obama and Trump, both of them used nostalgia, but it was getting at a different past that they were trying to bring back into the present, okay? So we set out to test this. Is nostalgia a conservative emotion, or is it that conservatives and liberals both nostalgize just about different things? Okay, so here I'm going to summarize 3 studies that were recently published in Frontiers in Political Science. There's an asterisk beside study 2 because I want to be clear it was an underpowered study. So there's a slight variation in the results that I'm going to show you. We think that it's attributable to the fact that study 2 was underpowered. But it's the same measures that I've basically been showing to you in the previous studies. but we wanted to look at, we recruited self-identified liberals and self-identified Republicans. What we found, this is study 1, that conservatives, as we anticipated, that conservatives were more likely to express homogeneity-focused nostalgia, and liberals were more likely to express openness-focused nostalgia. Now, what's also I want to highlight is that there was no main effect of collective nostalgia. So there were no differences in the amount of collective nostalgia that liberals and Democrats were, the extent to which they felt collective nostalgia. The only difference is the type of collective nostalgia that they felt. And we replicated this over 2 other studies. One of them, the study 3, a very large study, large end study in England. You do see that there was a slight difference in study 2 where we did see a main effect of nostalgizing, but I don't want to necessarily spend too much time on that because, again, that was the underpowered study. So that might just be a case of an artifact of it being underpowered. But in a meta-analysis of the findings, we found what we had anticipated, that liberals were more likely to experience openness-focused nostalgia, and that led them to have reduced levels of intergroup prejudice. Whereas conservatives were more likely to experience homogeneity-focused nostalgia, and they showed a higher level of intergroup prejudice. So now what we wanted to do is, okay, we've been doing a lot of stuff in the lab, okay? Let's take collective nostalgia out of the lab. And can framing certain aspects, we asked the question, can framing certain aspects of intergroup history as positive, okay, impact the type of collective nostalgia that group members experience, and can that in turn influence intergroup prejudice? We focused in this study on Poland because it's an interesting context, okay? It has very low diversity. Levels of prejudice tend to be quite high, but it was historically diverse. Now, also we focused on Poland because my current postdoc is from Poland and currently doing research with collaborators, so there's that as well. But what we were interested in finding out, so Anya, the postdoc working in my lab, she's been part of this School of Dialogue for, it started I think in 2015, that Poles, they recruit Poles to engage in 4 workshops, okay? And it's focused on local history, mutual heritage with Jewish population, and a history of Jewish minorities, that Jewish minorities being in that place of residence, that living in Poland side by side with them, and that there was a history of cooperation and living together in peace and harmony. Importantly, nostalgia is never mentioned during the 4 workshops. In one of the more recent versions of this workshop, there was 476 participants, and we were permitted to include a measure of openness-focused nostalgia and homogeneity-focused nostalgia, as well as some of these other measures have been in all of the waves. And what we were looking at is changes, okay, in participants' perceptions over time. And what we found here, hopefully you can see this on your screen, is that we found that the intervention, okay, we found that that due to the intervention, there was an increase in openness-focused nostalgia over the course of the intervention. And that openness-focused nostalgia ended up predicting an increase of positive attitudes towards Jews. We see that the intervention also decreased homogeneity-focused nostalgia. It increased knowledge and interest in history, but it was only the openness-focused nostalgia that was a significant mediator. In terms of attitudes towards diversity in general, here we saw two significant mediators. Once again, the openness-focused nostalgia and interest in history. So what's the implications of this research? Well, nostalgia can be used to motivate pro-diversity attitudes and positive intergroup relations. Teaching about historical coexistence can lead to nostalgizing about that time. So history can be used as a resource to improve intergroup relations. Now, the last study that I'm going to be presenting to you today pivots a little bit, okay? Thus far, we have examined how nostalgia, collective nostalgia, influences attitudes towards outgroups, okay? Now I want to turn our collective attention to the in-group. And one existential threat that may yield nostalgia is the belief that the group is being torn apart, okay? The rise in populism, the rise in polarization over the past 25 years has many Americans worried about the state of politics and the state of the union. This worry is understandable, okay, because up to a point, polarization can help democracies. But when it becomes too vast, such that entire swaths of a population refuse to even consider the other's view, this can thwart the democratic methods for solving societal problems. To the point, polarization may undermine the future vitality of one's nation. Okay, so on January 6th, in the midst of the insurrection at the Capitol, Dominic Packer and I not only commiserated on what we were witnessing on TV, we began chatting about our concerns about political polarization and whether these concerns might be at the heart of support for Trump, okay? And what we were witnessing and this support for strong leaders that we're seeing also around the globe. Now, according to a Pew poll, I believe it was in December 2020, that approximately 35% of Americans expected relations between Democrats and Republicans to worsen. Okay, while about 40% said that they thought that the poor relations between Democrats and Republicans would continue. So that's a huge majority of Americans who are really concerned about the politics that are going on in the States. And what we wondered is, might this concern about polarization have an ironic effect of heightening support for strong leaders, leaders who espouse that only I can right the ship, only I can bring us together. You need to rally under me. And so we decided to collect some data in the aftermath of the insurrection to assess a number of factors, including whether about concern about polarization, collective nostalgia, and support for strong leaders. Now, we had hoped to get a large sample of Trump and Biden voters to assess concerns on either side of the divide. but in the end, we didn't get a sufficient number of Trump voters to assess the Trump versus Biden voters. But what I will tell you is that when we measured political orientation and who they voted for, and the effects did not change, okay, depending on where they were on the political spectrum. So again, what we were wondering is, does concern about polarization lead to support for strong leaders? We measured homogeneity-focused nostalgia. One hypothesis was that concern about polarization will make people nostalgic for when they were all just one, okay? When we were all the same. And that homogeneity-focused nostalgia would lead to support for strong leaders. The other type of nostalgia that's unique from what I presented previously is what we're tentatively labeling civic civility focused nostalgia. So here's an item. I longed for a time when Americans placed greater value on democracy. And we wondered whether that might ironically lead to support for strong leaders. Now, we were kind of surprised by this result. We didn't see the relationship between concern about polarization leading to the homogeneity-focused nostalgia and then downstream consequences and support for strong leader. What we did see is quite a strong relationship between concern about polarization and this more civic, civility-focused nostalgia, and that is what predicted support for strong leaders. Okay, now we took a step back and went, what's going on here? And one thing that Dom and I have complained about for some time now about the strong leader literature is akin to what I complained about with the nostalgia literature, in that the measurement of it. So when in the past, when people measured nostalgia, as I feel nostalgic for my group's history, the support for strong leader measures tend to be, do you support strong leaders? Okay, but there's different kinds of strong leaders, right? There's, for example, a strong leader, support for a leader who has unconstrained authority, okay? Someone most concerned about, the agency and security from within or from without might be interested in a leader who will consolidate executive authority to get stuff done, right? Even if it might be a little divisive, okay? Then there's another kind of strong leader, what we're calling sort of the unifying force strong leader. Someone who's most concerned about loss of shared experiences, my desire leader whose strength is derived by mass popularity and the ability to unify under that. Now, I'm excited to tell you that, in fact, we just finished a study today, or I guess yesterday, where we collected data on a follow-up study. And we're still doing some data cleaning, but what we found thus far is absolutely fascinating. And Dom and I are meeting tomorrow, I think it is, to go over this. Because while homogeneity-focused nostalgia was predictive of support for strong leader, it was the unconstrained authority, okay, kind of leader. And the civic nostalgizing was predictive of a strong unifying leader, okay? Additionally, in terms of the antecedents, we replicated this association between concern about polarization leading to this civic focused nostalgia. And we found that what was predictive of the homogeneity focused nostalgia was concern about loss of freedom of speech that's happening, that they perceive as happening in the States. The items were directly tapping into concern about what's now called cancel culture, okay? And it's that concern that's leading to the homogeneity focus nostalgia. But we still have a lot more data analysis to do, and I'd be happy to report back maybe next week. I can send an email to Kate about what we're finding, but we're absolutely fascinated by this. Now, these data suggest a route to various forms of populism, okay? And this is important because it can be argued that these are dangerous times for democracy. Russia, Turkey, Poland, Hungary, countries that once offered democratic hope are now in varying degrees falling into authoritarianism. And what's at the heart of that? Well, different types of collective nostalgia might be relatively easily stimulated by political leaders who portray the group to be under existential threat, whether it be from immigrants, from political elites that are undermining the economy, polarization, or from the loss of freedom of speech. By portraying the group's past as unequivocally, I butchered that word, positive, and promising to bring back the past's greatness, populists can galvanize substantial political support. Now, what should you be taking away from this talk? The stories that we tell matter, because those stories can and have been used to galvanize the group in good times, but especially in bad. I absolutely love this quote. The universe is made up of stories, not atoms. I would cross out universe and say the group is made up of stories, not atoms, okay? Now, is nostalgizing good or is it bad? Okay, is collective nostalgia good or bad? Well, rationalists have typically disparaged it for clouding critical judgment. I feel, and has some of my data show, an equivocal evaluation is in order. Its implications should not be prejudged as good or bad, conservative or regressive. Many noble causes have been sustained on longing for a better past, okay? Our data in Poland suggests that it can have pro-diversity effects. Nostalgia can be harnessed for the betterment of society. This, however, does not mean that we can overlook how it can be used for ill purposes. But at the end of the day, the content of nostalgia matters. And more globally, one of my concerns about the intergroup emotions literature is that we haven't given enough attention to the content of the emotion that's being experienced, okay? We just ask people, do you feel nostalgic? As opposed to, what are you nostalgic about? And that matters. In closing, of course, there's no I in team. This is the current team that has been working with me on the collective nostalgia line of research. I welcome your questions, and if you have any ideas, I'm always open to collaborations as well. And so I thank you all for your time.
Thanks, Michael. Thank you for that. So, you know, very compelling and clear, taking us through a whole body of work so we can understand the meaning of the group and how it shapes people's beliefs and actions. And I guess my question was related to that in a way. I mean, at its core, are we talking about contestation of identity, and that the meaning of a group's identity fundamentally is going to shape all aspects of their understanding of the group, historic and future oriented, you know, and affect, you know, their preferences for leaders and affect their behavior? That this is about, is it about that question, contestation over who we are?
Yeah, I think so. And I think that, you know, who we are is always a fundamental question that a group asks, right? At least as a Canadian, this has been a long-standing question. What does it mean to be a Canadian? And for the longest time, you know, there's actually an interesting paper and that saying, you know, that the Canadian identity is basically we're not Americans, right? But after that kind of discussion happened when I was younger, there was an active desire to understand what it means to be Canadian, and a lot of that is baked into like how we our past, right?
Yep.
So then Canada, you know, there was an effort to make sure that Canadians felt that we were the multicultural country. Who embraced multiculturalism. We were the world peacekeepers, right? Whereas the Americans were the world police officers. We were the peacekeepers. We were the nice guys, right? And that kind of got shaken when there was greater attention directed to how we've treated our Indigenous population, right? And so I think that, you know, I go back to that first slide about the Jenga tower, that our group is made up of stories, right? That is what's at the essence of what it means to be a group. And then you have leaders or identity entrepreneurs who try to shift that narrative, right? And a lot of the time that desire to shift the narrative, at the core of that is trying to direct the populace in one direction or another.
No, I mean, I'll open it up to questions, but where, you know, I think that in some ways when we think about social psychology in the world, I mean, where some of this work seemed to be incredibly fruitful was paying a lot of attention to definitions of who we are or how that's being portrayed, because it fundamentally will affect all sorts of things, anti-immigrant, you know, sentiment, support for particular kinds of leaders, the way in which we might engage in progressive action. So, you know, it fundamentally is at the core of driving some of that norm and behaviour change. But I can't actually see the audience, but maybe others can tell me some questions. We've got one here from Michael Plato, and he's gone. So he just wanted to say, great seeing you, if it's only virtually, and he's off to give a lecture. So, yeah.
Well, please say hello back.
Are there other comments or questions for Michael? So we've got just a few minutes. Michaela? Joanne?
I've answered all the questions. Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, well, there's always one for me, sorry. My question was that it's like, well, I feel that some social psychology issue feels like linguistics, because the languages changes across time, and also has not only the diachronic change, but there's synchronic interactions with other languages that affect its change. But then by the end of the day, when you're talking to people who are advocates of those language preservation people, they don't quite bother going into those nitty-gritty details of the history to figure out what actually happened. Or maybe it's just too hard, too much information for them to process. So I think that's do you think that in cultural aspect, there is something similar that once things gets way more complex than people are willing to accept or willing to learn, it's hard to let them really face a reality. Thank you.
So are you, if I'm hearing you, and correct me if I'm wrong, about you're asking me about how language plays into the construction of the identity and the nostalgizing. Am I correct there?
Oh, sorry. Probably I was just making an analogy between linguistics and social psychology, and my question really was that when things are getting too complicated for the your interlocutors their willingness to accept or embrace the complexity of the history,
So I guess the question, Michael, is just, why don't people go and find out for themselves what the right version of history is?
Well, that's loaded, right? That's the right version of history. I've argued, and others before me, the late Dennis Hilton argued that history is a social construction, right? So yes, there are facts, but it's how people interpret that history. And as we can see from the battle right now about what it means to be American, is that people can focus on different aspects of the group's history and try to bring that out, or interpret the history differently, and all with a specific end in mind. So, is there a true history? I mean, there's events that happen, but as a social psychologist, what I'm interested in is how do people interpret that, and how do they use that to build a narrative about what it means to be a group member, and where the group boundaries exist, right? Because that can shift and change depending on what your narrative of what it means to be a group is, what it means to be an American is, what it means to be a Canadian, what it means to be an Australian.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so Michael, we're at time. I've got a few follow-up questions, but you'll be happy to know that we very much here are also in some of the work that I've been doing with other students and postdocs, very much focused on the content question, and equally can think of other areas where people have been working with identification or other concepts here, and yet what seems to be neglected are some of these elements of content, which are quite critical in getting a more systematic and richer explanation of what's going on. We have another question here from Erin. Did you want to ask that, Erin?
I was just sneaking it in because I wasn't sure if I get to catch up with Michael, but I don't want to extend the seminar too far. I was just more sort of linking again to some of the things, Michael, you were saying with some sort of parallel observations in the field of human memory about the malleability of memory shaping individual identities, and the how the past and how elements, content of the past shape our ability to think about the future and guide our behavior as well. So you look at it from a social lens. I'm coming in as a cognitive psychologist, and I could see some sort of interesting parallels there, but I know we're short of time, so I just want to throw it out there, put it on your mind.
Yeah, and I'm happy to stay behind once we stop, the record button, should anybody want to stay behind. But I agree with everything that you're saying. I think the added interesting bit when you take it to the group level is that events that happen well before the time that you even existed, okay, can impact group identity. And one might argue that it's easier to manipulate a past that no current group member experienced directly, right? So it might be a tad easier for group leaders to manipulate what it means to be a group member by targeting some aspect of the group's past and trying to bring some event that perhaps wasn't in the public consciousness before to the fore, right? And saying, well, we need to go back to that.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. And there are some who do research in collective memory, and I think there are a lot of really interesting crossovers. I think your work's really fascinating.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. We will have to leave it there because we have a staff meeting that many of us need to go to. And it's very timely, your talk, because we're going to be discussing a potential restructure, which creates all sorts of collective angst for us as a group. So we might keep you posted on that one as well. So thanks for your time.
Please
we will follow up and further some of these aspects of the conversation. So thank you for sharing your Tuesday night, giving a presentation. Good luck with the rest of lockdown, and here's hoping that things improve in your area very soon. And we'll keep in touch.
Yes, thanks so much for inviting me. It was a pleasure. And should anybody have any follow-up questions or want to chat with me, please don't be afraid to reach out. I'm only a Zoom call away.
Okay. Thanks, Michael. See you.
Okay, be well. Bye-bye.
Thank you.